So, welcome to Belfast, Wales. My name is Jonathan Watson, and today's guest is Shelley F. Knight. Shelley holds a first class degree in adult nursing and postgraduate studies in palliative care and life limiting illnesses, pathophysiology of cancer, cytotoxic chemotherapy, and clinical hypnotherapy. In addition, Shelley holds a plethora of holistic and spiritual qualifications, such as mindfulness, NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming, to name but a few. Shelley is also an author of Positive Change and a self kick book. She's also the host of the Positive Change, a self kick podcast, as well as freelance writer for international magazines. Her latest book, Good Grief: The A to Z Approach of Modern Day Grief Healing, is out now and is available to purchase. So thanks so much for coming on, Shelley.
Bless you. Thank you so much for taking the time to read the very long bio.
No, I had to kind of streamline it down a bit, so hopefully that was okay. But no, thank you. So Shelley, just to get us started, I know you originally started off in palliative care as a nurse. How did you get into that?
I think I fell into it.
Okay.
I did like nursery nursing when I was in my teenagers. So I did like work with children. And then I went into nursing later in life, like 10 years later when I was 28. And I worked in acute medicine. So it's a bit like A&E. So it's where everyone comes with acute sudden onset of illness. But when I was working in that setting, I received the news one New Year's Day from my mum to say my beautiful stepdad had died. And I was working on the ward at the time. And so I did go back to work, but then the grief kind of come in like it did a few months later. And it's kind of a strange story, but it's kind of my story as well. That because my stepdad died suddenly, I didn't have a chance to say goodbye and those what ifs and all that kind of thing. So I wanted to go and work in hematology and oncology just to kind of see, work at the end of life. What's it like when you have a life-changing diagnosis, when you have that chance to say goodbye? So that's how I then ended up being a chemotherapy nurse for many years and working with cancer patients, but often end of life as well if they weren't responding to treatment or from, it's caught too late and things like that. So yeah, I kind of fell into it by accident, just from like loss in my own life, because bizarrely when I went into nursing, it's all sort of like a degree in healthcare, but they don't prepare you that in that healthcare, not everyone gets their health and some people, die. But I hadn't been exposed to loss, Jonathan. My grandparents were alive, my friends were alive. I think my dog died when I was 9. That was it. Yeah. But I don't know, maybe it's like my life lessons, soul journey, who knows. But as soon as I went into healthcare and started to see loss professionally, it started to happen in my own life. So yeah, kind of like, the first 3 decades of my life, I was just Shelley bumbling along, and then took this huge turn of working with grief and mental health.
Because the thing with death is, and I can only speak for living in the Western world, but it's very weird how we handle it. It's as real as birth, or like you wake up each morning in the sun. It's a fact of life. But yet we've kind of pushed it away. And you look at history, even not that far ago, death was pretty much in your face. Through generations, like you mentioned grandparents. I know my grandparents, people who have been born in the house they grew up in, they've been born there, and they've often died there, or their older relatives would die. So you've been kind of seen that. We've obviously today we've pushed it all to the peripheral of our society. Maybe you'll see the occasional hearse driving past. Have we, by us doing this, have we inadvertently made dealing with death harder because of how we live now?
Yeah, so my background, my family background is very much like yours, that I was raised, a huge influence was living with my grandparents as well as my parents, and, I'm from a very large family. And so I saw what you saw, that, my mum and all of her siblings were born in the cottage where my grandparents lived. And then when my grandparents were dying, you know, they died in the home. And it was just what we did. You probably would have got a local florist or the local gardens to do the flowers for the funeral, probably the local carpenter made the coffin, the village hall would be where you'd have your wake and things like that. But I saw it as I went into nursing, like we've had these medical advancements, and it's almost now, whilst it's brilliant for maintaining dignity at the end of life, you know, like hospice and hospice at home and things like that, it's very clinical. I mean, like when I was nursing, I left in 2019. It shifted in those 20 years. You know, it had sort of gone from almost like you'd come in acute medicine where I first started out, and, you know, often people died. But as I got to the end of my career, you know, there was like a medicine for it, they'd ventilate for it, you know, they'd do trials for it. So there was medical advancements. And I say advancements kind of, you know, because it's advancements if we're clinically keeping someone alive, but they're not aware of it. But we won't go there today. Yeah. But I think with the clinical advancements, the medical innovations that I've seen, they're almost controlling death. But obviously, you know, if you're prolonging life, you're living with longer conditions, and then it's in a clinical setting. So if you are sort of, you know, on IV therapies, pain relief, a lot of it is in a clinical setting. And we get detached from seeing our loved ones deteriorating, you know, from the death and end of life conversations. And, you know I was raised by my grandparents and my parents. We spoke very openly, but yeah, I agree with you that we've almost become afraid of how to be around illness, let alone grief, loss and death. Yeah. And I think that's sad because it's the only certainty in life and we're just so detached. And I think, I don't know, it's a huge thing to say, but maybe if society and medical world hadn't changed so much, we'd be in better place, you know, during the pandemic, we'd still have some of those coping and life skills that we once had.
Yeah, because when you look at like, and it's great that we've made advancements where people are far healthier, children are far healthier. A lot women, like I don't know if anyone's ever done any statistical figures, but I'm sure the numbers of women who died in childbirth, maybe from 100 years ago up until now, I'm sure it'll probably like a slope off, a big drop. So it's fantastic we have those advancements, but I kind of, if you look at some of the history, even like in the ancient Rome, death was very much, it was everywhere. I mean, I think babies, again, quote me if I make a mistake in saying this, I think babies didn't get their name until they reached the first year, because the expectation was it was increased chance of the child dying, and so it was kind of a coping mechanism for the families not to get too attached. So when from what I remember reading, when the child reached the year of one, it would be given a name and kind of like what we do when the child's born, but then it was a year after the birth because there was a high chance the child might not make it. So it's, yeah, I'm not an extreme version, but it's kind of like if you bring death up on a topic, people go, that's dark, you're very dark, and that's changed the subject. We know it happens, but we want to live in a kind of a fantasy land that it doesn't happen, or it's kind of like it's pushed that further down the line, not think about it.
Yeah.
Obviously working, what was it like working with people who obviously they're at the end of their lives, and what was that like? I know it sounds like a silly kind of self-evident question, but it's
No, it's got to be the most privileged job in the world, and I'm a zigzag. I've done a lot of jobs in this world, Jonathan. 47, I think I know where I am now. But yeah, the many jobs I've done, it's just so privileged because, you know, what people don't realise in life is actually time is precious. And one of the patients once said to me, you'll always know how much time you have. No, you always know how much money you have. You never know how much time. And it's really stuck with me. And because it is precious, it's not sort of like a learning curve like you get in other elements of your life. At the end of life, you have to get it right. You have to make sure these people have the right treatment. You've connected them with their lost people in their life and that. So it's a privilege. And it was, as you said earlier about the birth and that, I was actually pregnant with my first son whilst working in that environment. And it was that kind of life-death balance. But there was like life lessons, if you will, that used to come through. And it's more walks of life, and it was males and females, but these like 5 lessons about how to really live your life, like what they hadn't realised until facing their own mortality. And so, no, it was the most privileged job in the world. And there was so much laughter because people used to look at me when they said what you do. It's like, oh, I'm a chemotherapy nurse. They used to be like, oh, you poor cow, you know, as if I've been really evil in a past life and that was my penance. Yeah. But there's loads of laughter. And I run a death cafe here in the Midlands in the UK. And there's laughter there. And I think it's, you know, like anything in life, if you're not talking about it, it becomes scary. But actually, you know, there's some beautiful, beautiful moments when we're doing like death cafes, end of life. So I loved it.
And what sorry for being unfamiliar, what is a death cafe? Is it just kind of like a place where people can go talk about people who've passed away, or yeah?
Yeah, so it's a huge movement that was set up by the late John Underwood, and it's just to get people like gathering around, you know, and it can be to talk about their grief, or it can be to talk about death, just to get people talking about it. And there's been like 12,000 events around the world, and it's in about 82 different countries.
Okay.
And it was when I left nursing in November 2019. I just left knowing that there was people, I'd seen families like 5 years after I'd nursed their loved one, still with that sort of bedside look of grief. They hadn't moved on. And I think, well, it's not I think, I know that when we lose someone, you know, initially you're sort of like doing the funeral, choosing the wood for the coffin, who do you need to let know, all the, you know, paperwork paraphernalia, and people rally round. But, you know, let's be real that they go back to their own life after the funeral, and then you don't talk about it and you don't ask for help, you know. And so I think it's hard to grieve for a lot of people because we're told, oh, you never get over it. And then by the other, you know, way, people will say like, oh, it's been 3 months. Have you not moved on yet? And so I wanted to create a space where people, you know, whether it was 3 months or 3 decades, could just come and talk about their loved ones, how they're doing, asking about, you know, anything they need to, you know, just life. I think we all need to talk more.
Yeah, because it is very much like a feeling that if someone kind of dies, you're almost expect, okay, we're very sorry about that, but please grieve him privately and don't have an episode in front of people. It's kind of very much, and or if you're working and someone's exercise kind of thing, well, you don't ask them about it. Just say I'm very sorry, and we are kind of like you do sometimes get confronted. Oh, you meet someone, go, how you haven't seen in a while. My father died. It's kind of like, oh, you feel awkward. You're like, what do I say, kind of thing, and it's kind of, yeah, it's like an uneasiness. They feel uneasy, kind of thing. They're like, I maybe want to talk, but I don't know if you want to talk, and vice versa. It's just kind of, I think we've made it very silly when that shouldn't be, or overly complicated when it should be more simple.
Yeah, I agree. I just think communication around grief, and like when I speak about grief, it's not just like death of a loved one, it's loss of anything with which you have an emotional connection. So like in the last year of my life, like my husband like lost his job due to the pandemic, I lost my health with long COVID, you know, and there's impacts when we have this grief process. So I think probably the world's grieving at the moment but doesn't know about it because they always think it's to do with a loved one. Yeah. But you know, it is the communication around grief. So like even if your friend has a relationship breakup, you feel a bit, oh, should I say I never liked him anyway, or do I pat her, does she want a hug, you know? And we don't know what to do when people's life changes, and that's not even in death. I think, you know, there's so many advancements of social media, you know, and emailing and texting and all the other things, but I think we sometimes get even worse at communicating. I
think with technology, it's easy to kind of just go, sorry to hear that, sand, I've done my bit, and kind of walk away. Obviously, with the people that you're working with, a lot of them are at the end of their lives. What were some of the lessons that you learned from your time working with those people that were obviously maybe only a few days left or even a few hours left of their life?
Yeah, I'll say that was always the same kind of messages, and it didn't matter. I mean, I've spoken before about how I've like nursed millionaires when I worked in the private sector, and I've worked, you know, stay-at-home mums. I've worked with them all, and I always think it's like they say, be happier. And I think, really? Like, you get to the end of your life and you think, what can you bestow on the living? And it's like, be happier. That, you know, sometimes when you want to laugh aloud and you don't, or you want to be with someone, not the man you're in a relationship with, or you do a job because your family tell you to, you know, it's a sensible, well-paid job. And it's just like, allow yourself to be happier.
Yeah.
And I think I do stick by that. You know, it's probably why I have a zigzag and have many careers, because, you know, we change, which means our choices change. And so, yeah, always be happier. The other thing was connection. Like, I think a simple way of saying it is like, always believe in something in life, whether that's yourself or God or local community, that always know that you do matter, but you're part of the bigger picture. So it's sort of like, you know, in grief, like get out and do some fundraising, or, you know, connect to Mother Nature, find a faith you believe in, you know, go to a death cafe and find, you know, community that way. The one I live my life by, which my husband will agree with, I don't really have a filter and I always speak my truth. And it was just, this came from nursing a beautiful gentleman who hadn't allowed himself to be happier. He'd always quite literally bit his tongue, hadn't spoken out, had married the girl who was supposed to, took over his father's business that he didn't want to. And he'd never really spoken his truth about what he wanted to do, what he didn't want to do. And then he got esophageal cancer and was going to have, like, lose his voice box, lose the ability to speak.
Yeah.
And it was so poignant for me that he'd never used his voice and now it was going to be taken away from him. And he just said, like, speak your truth. And it isn't that if I said something, you know, so we'd having a row and I would say, like, Jonathan, and it's not like I'm right and you're wrong. It's just speaking what's true for you and getting it out, just being heard. The other simple thing is just do more of what you love. Because we don't, do we? We always sort of like save up till we've got £5 in the bank, or, you know, when you've got that grade in your nursing, or when you know, paid off that bill. But no, do more of what you love. And this one's always quite similar to the other lessons, but it's like, live your life. And it is just, you know, not putting it off, you know. So when I'm that age, or I see this in so many people, that they say yes to everyone else, you know, just like, yes, I'd love to go on that course, get to know your sewing machine, which they don't really want to go on. You know, we're always saying yes to others, but no to ourselves. We give away our time, our energy, you know, our hopes, dreams, everything. So yeah, just really live your life.
Yeah.
And that's not sort of like always going on a cruise around the world. You know, it can just be like getting up, doing 10-minute yoga, having a fat Friday, you know, healthy eat the rest of the week. But they're just little things that make a big difference. And I think that's, you know, all the life lessons really are, that when you get to the end of your life, the little things are probably the big things all along.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we do. I think we kind of arrogantly think, oh, we'll have more time, and what you actually probably, well, for all you know it, you may have. I mean, and I think we do, and I always let this myself as well. We take our time for granted, and I think one of the, I have two wee boys. One of the things that you kind of realize was, when you were younger, you always thought, I don't have time, I don't have time. But then, once you get older and you have kids, you realize you actually have loads of time. You had pretty much all the time in the world. You had this wealth of time. And I think it's those points you raised there from the people is rings true. We try get the next latest thing to make ourselves look good, or make neighbours jealous, or squabbling and work over petty, insignificant things. I think that's the most important thing. But the real important things are just what you mentioned there, is really, really basic. But that's like the truth, really, the truth of the matter.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you know, I'm sure my kids would love all the designer brands and things like that, but I'm just sort of like, well, tough. You've got to find extraordinary in the ordinary, and we're going for an autumn walk, and you're going to kick some leaves around, you know, climb a tree, you know, spot the squirrel. And it is, you know, yeah, you know, they're not naked, they do have clothes, but I don't think they have to be branded, you know, especially our teenager, you know, because you've got the peer pressure and things like that. And it's like, mate, they're not going to remember your shoe brand in 20 years' time, but they remember if you're a good person who is interesting to talk to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, I mean, the things you worry about, definitely as a teenager, you think the opinions of others feels like like it's like almost like a God's judgment, or it's like what's thought about you is law. When you get older, you look back, you go, that was all nonsense, all insignificant nonsense. Like, and man, it doesn't, it crumbles away, it fades away to nothing really. Um, Obviously, your book's about touches on grief. What is grief, and also how has grief changed over the past century? And has it got worse? Again, we touched on with Bruce death to the peripheral. Um, by doing that, has that made grief a lot worse to deal with?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, to me, grief isn't just like death of a loved one. To me, grief is the loss of anything with which you've got an emotional connection. So I think everyone's grieving. So if you have a relationship breakdown, or you lose your confidence, your health, your dreams, even like freedom and control with a pandemic, I suspect we're probably grieving. So to me, grieving is the loss of emotional connection, but bereavement is like, the emotional state following the death of a loved one. So, bereavement is to do with death. And then we've got mourning, which is kind of beyond your natural reaction to a loss. It's kind of dictated by faith and religion. I mean, you're Irish, I'm sure you have like, your own traditions and things like that. But that's what mourning is, when it's kind of dictated. Is it like Buddhists have to do it for 90 days and things like that? So that's the difference. So it's loss of emotional connection, loss of a loved one, or kind of dictated grief, which I find fascinating because, we have people saying, oh, once someone's died, you never get over it. Whereas if you have a certain religion, you say you've got 30 days, 90 days, a year and a day to process it. That's your lot. And I love that. I'd be interested to do a master's in it to see the repercussions of not grieving naturally. But I think it shows the power of mindset as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I think, yeah, there's very different cultures in the world. There's, like, as you have a period of mourning, which is dictated by the traditions and the customs of that country. So yeah, it is fascinating. I suppose also, again, not to sound harsh to anyone maybe watching this, I think also from my own personal viewpoint, and yes, this is based on limited experience, thankfully, of losing anyone, but I think there's also a danger of falling into like a deep grief well. That's the right way, and then kind of being stuck there, and then that then become a detriment to your own life and health and well-being, which I'm sure the person that you've lost wouldn't necessarily want you to be in. They would be like, no, don't do that. Get on with your life. It's important that you live it. So it's yeah, that's interesting. It'd be interesting to see, say if there was a study done to see what the difference would be between coming to a natural end of it.
Yeah, and I think that, because we were speaking earlier, weren't we, about like how things have changed, what is medical advancements. So when I did my nursing degree like 20 years ago, it's probably more than that, I'm probably just in denial. But when I did it, we didn't really speak about grief. As I said, it was healthcare. It was about making people better. And I remember like they just said, oh, there's like 3 types of grief. It's like, you have a normal grief, delayed grief, or absent grief. So you're either like crying, not yet, or you will, kind of thing. But when I was creating like the book, Good Grief, the A to Z approach of modern day grief healing, this was during the onset of the pandemic. There's around 17 different types of grief now, not 3. Okay. And it does come from like the medical advancements and things like that. So like we now have like people living longer with dementia, and we have people living with multiple conditions, whereas before they would have died of old age, it would have said on your medical certificate. So grief is changing, and I think with that we change how we grieve. So a huge one now, but it's kind of new in grief terms, is anticipatory grief. And that's when the person's still physically here, but you're grieving the loss of, who they are, what could have been. And we see that quite a lot, when people are living with dementia or they're on life support, they're still there, but you start to grieve. And it started even with my dad. My stepdad died many years ago, hence why I do the work I do. But my actual biological dad, he's got life-limiting illness. And, so he's still very much here, but it's kind of like, looking back on the years we lost, what can we do in the future? So
Yeah.
yeah, the griefs change. So whilst you might get a medical advancement over here, there is a ripple effect of how we process it as a society. We have lots of, like when Princess Diana died many decades ago, that was a
Yeah.
sort of like a communal grief.
Yeah.
We've got things like disfranchised grief, which I know I've experienced, like where I've had a miscarriage, but people didn't know I was pregnant. So then I'm trying to grieve, but people think, why she miserable cow this week? So there's so many different types of grief as we change as a society.
Yeah. Because I know people grieve obviously different, and you hear people that be going, "Oh, he doesn't look affected by that. He's not crying. He's not that." But I think that's very judgmental because that person could be, from their perspective, could be, "Oh, I need to be strong for the family alignment," and they're probably torn inside, but they just, as you say, some people cry. It obviously affects people differently, and I think suppose you need to be like have an understanding of just, well, maybe because one person isn't crying or doesn't seem to show that's hurting them doesn't mean it's not hurting them inside. It could just be used to put a brave face on things to kind of be an anchor for all the other people around them. Um, I think when we were reading about the grief process before, I think Niall was born. But would you be able to go over the grief process for us?
Yeah, so I do love Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her stages of grief, but then I don't entirely agree with them. I don't think grief is ever linear. So she said, is it denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, which I think people may go through. Later in life, she worked with David Kessler and he added in meaning. And I loved that because I think, when we can apply meaning into any loss in life, it just helps us heal a bit better. So to me, there isn't a linear grief process, and because there's 17 different types of grief, and because we're all as unique as our fingerprint and in our grief, there's not a direct process that we go through. So if you're crying and snotting, that's fine. If you're not crying, that's fine. But my concern is that a lot of us are going through a grief process with loads of signs and symptoms, but not knowing we're grieving. Like I'm saying with the pandemic, like, yes, we did lose loved ones, but we also lost jobs, finances, loads of different things. And so that triggers a grief process, which is like a change in our emotional state. But there's so many signs and symptoms. And I said there's 17 different types of grief, probably more from years to come. So I just think, when people say, "Oh, how do I grieve?" It's like, however the hell you want, really, And men or women, I don't want to be gender specific, but generally they grieve differently. So men will be instrumental grievers and women will be intuitive grievers. So you can correct me if you don't fit into this category, Jonathan, but generally men are instrumental because they can't fix what's happened. So they act out the grief very physically. So they try and fix the cars and fix the house and work out. And they're very physical. Whereas women, you can't tell, but we talk a lot. We're very intuitive. And so we do talk a lot. And, I feel like that. And inside, I know that. And we're very probably more in tune with what's going on for us. So yeah, we process grief differently. And then it also, it just goes on for, it's like a tin of worms, isn't it? But then it depends how the loved one died. Was it traumatic? Was it murder? Was it, long time coming? Was it to suicide? There's all different ways and they all create different processes.
Yeah.
It's massive, grief, trying to define grief in a sentence is, it's lots of an emotional connection because it's vast when you start to pick away at the layers.
Because at the moment I was out yesterday, fine enough, running, and I was listening to Ant Middleton's audiobook, and he talked about grief and that, and he talked about obviously when they were out on deployment, they lost comrades and stuff like that, and he was saying with grief, he says there'll be people who will think, "Oh, that'll never affect me. I'll not let it in," and he says that hits you harder if you have that mindset. It'll hit you harder than it does if you just kind of go, "I'll see how it all pans out and see, kind of take it as it comes." What would be some of the symptoms for in grief? Like, what would be some of the symptoms that comes up? I know again, it sounds like a very obvious question to ask.
It's vast. I mean, in the book Good Grief, I try and break it down logically into sort of like, you know, the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, behavioural, even the social aspects. So it's vast, but, you know, for anyone who's, I think everyone thinks you're just crying and you're depressed, but it's more than that, you know, like physically, you know, if you start from the head, you get headaches, migraines, skin changes, dry mouth, sore throats, sensitive to light and sound. You know, grief's very much in our hearts. We're prone to sort of like palpitations and things like that. Mentally, where do we begin? You know, is the anxiety, depression, panic attacks. I get like real brain fog, forgetful, lack of concentration. Emotionally, well, it's just vast. It's like, you know, it's like, you know, the anger, the guilt, the rawness, the sadness. I mean, I see a lot of anger. Saw a lot of anger, you know, because people think, why me? Why our family?
Yeah.
Socially, I see this a lot in the death cafe. And it's where, you know, you just change. So socially, you might want to really, really cling to people, want all the help in the world. And then you might be the opposite, where you think no one understands me, you keep yourself to yourself. You know, that's why I did the death cafe. I had this real thing about participation, not isolation, because I think we try and lock ourselves away, feeling misunderstood. I think behaviours are real key on what grief you're going through. So with the real complicated griefs, this is where it would be a trigger. If you're someone observing someone in grief and they have some of these behaviours, they've probably got quite a complex grief that needs, you know, external help to themselves. So it would be like flashbacks, jumpiness, paranoia, defensive, almost, you know, like delusional and impulsive, quite scary. So that's behavioural, and then like spiritual, like, which is lovely because we've said about the regrets of the dying, but spiritually it can be a loss of a faith or belief you've had for all your life, thinking, well, no, why could God take them, or whatever you believe in. We can go the other way, that you then start to be curious about the afterlife, you know, life lessons, life between life, finding something. And why I wrote Good Grief is that I really believe that there can be a real spiritual emergence, a real spiritual growth, almost like a collateral beauty, where the harshest thing you'd ever, you know, the thing you try and avoid all your life has happened. And I think when you hit rock bottom, you can't do anything but, you know, rise up, really. But yeah, there must be hundreds of signs and symptoms. You know, people probably sit there today thinking, yeah, it is. And it is like generally because it whacks your immune system. If you're starting to get more prone to coughs and colds, you know, this is part of your grief process.
Yeah, no. What advice would you give someone who's really, if they're watching this now and they're going through grief themselves, what kind of advice would you give, even just a simple basic advice?
I'd ask them to be really honest with themselves. I mean, in Good Grief, you know, my background is clinical for like 30 years. So, you know, if you feel that you're at that point where every day is overwhelming, you're demotivated, then please reach out to a healthcare professional. You know, consider talking therapies, do that. But I just ask people to just sit in their grief every day. And I don't mean be really macabre and miserable. Just really, you know, you've lived with yourself all your life. What is it that you need? You know, do you need to change your nutrition? Do you need to get out more, change a job, you know, get professional help? Do you want to look down that spiritual path? Do you want to write down and journal? Do you want to join, you know, the local community, do some fundraising? And I think the key thing for me is, this comes from our strange family though, Jonathan. We always say, if you keep doing what you're doing, you only get what you've got. And so basically, if you're sitting there every day in your grief thinking, I feel miserable, can't believe they're gone, that's all you're going to get. You're not going to heal. You're not going to grow. You're not going to find the meaning. And so every day, just try something new, whether it's stepping outside in Mother Nature, you know, just like I'm saying 10 minutes, really, I'm secretly thinking an hour of your 24 hours. Just try and make a difference every day. You know, read an empowering book, you know, eat better, walk more, you know, reach out to others. It's just little things. But I just think when we sit there and we're dictated, like you're going to be depressed, it's going to be your whole life, you need to take medication. I think these are really outdated beliefs.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, depending on obviously if this person's close to you, again, mentioned this already, they wouldn't want that. if they're able to see that, they wouldn't be like taking pleasure and look what happened to someone like my husband or my son or whatever or daughter. They wouldn't want you wouldn't want if your children if you passed away and you're able to see your children, you want to see your children suffering and struggle. You want like look, I know it's horrific what happened, but you have to carry on. You have to um, try and live what life you've got and make the best of that. I know that, but because that's one way you could kind of look at it in that way. Again, I know it might not be a helpful thing saying, but yeah, I think there's a real danger of kind of falling into towards like an ever deepening cycle of uh, just being stuck in grief and not being able to move on would be pretty horrific. Um, Obviously, one of the things that kind of people kind of talk about, you often hear people saying, "How did so and so die?" or whatever, and normally we always kind of go, "Hopefully that was quick," or "they died in their sleep." And like my own grand sister, she got up in the middle of the night, went and made herself something to eat, and then went back to bed and died in her sleep. So this kind of comes to the next point from the book, and what I'm trying to say is there such a thing as a good death? And I think from my point of view, I mean, talking about my grand sister, that's I think a lot of people like to go that way, be able to get up, make yourself a inadvertently last meal, and then just go to sleep, and that's over. Especially if you've lived in your up into your 90s.
Yeah, that sounds like my ideal death, I think. Just like having a snack before I go, that'd be me.
One for the road.
Yeah. Again, going back to like working at the end of life, this is not everyone. Obviously I didn't nurse and work in different aspects of healthcare for 30 years. There's not everyone. There were people that didn't want to die. We tried to make it as dignified as possible. But generally, if you've had a good life or got things right at the end of your life, then you don't have that resistance. But I think that is the key. And, like we always said at the start, that we don't speak about death and the end of life. But I think I've witnessed, if I'm really honest, that we're not really truly living anyway. Like people just live in fear and they don't go for that job, that man, that salary, that travel. We're not really living. We're so fearful of everything. Whereas I think, if you got to the end of your life and you've travelled to that country, you tried your hardest in the career, you loved and lost, you tried it all, you don't die with those regrets within you. There's a beautiful quote, like I think it's like, you don't die, the music's still playing inside of you. Like just get it all out in your life.
Yeah.
And that's why I love my job, because it was so insightful at the end of life. Because I tell you now that at the end of the life, no one ever said, could you bring in my designer shoes, Shelley, or could you my car in. It was always like, could you reconnect me with my ex-wife? I just want to say I'm sorry. Could you find my daughter? I haven't seen her in all these years. I've been too busy working. In dogs very common as well. Could you bring in the dog? Going back to that connection. So I think if you get things, if you haven't had a good life and you have a chance to put it right before you transition into another place, you can have a good death. But I think the key of it is not wait until the end of your life to have a good life. It is, just making every day count. I'm really passionate that people sort of try something new every day, like day one rather than one day. And obviously I'm blessed that I've worked at the end of the life. So I know that sometimes one day doesn't come. But, if we really live our life, not like what our parents think, our boyfriend thinks, not even the dog that owns me. If we live what we want to do, you can have a blast along the way, and it does make it easier.
Yeah, because it's first one like this during the week, and I'm sure a lot of people when they're on their deathbed, such, I'm sure there's no regrets of, oh, should have did more vacuuming or more cleaning or washing those dishes. Didn't do enough of that. It's silly things that they said. Kind of, I suppose it takes us to look at death to kind of see that as you said, we're not really living. We're just living in fear, and we worry about stuff that's really insignificant. I know a lot of people go, "What do you wash dishes?" But that's not what I mean. It's we worry too much about the insignificant things in life to kind of that we miss out on the important stuff.
Yeah, I think we just kind of existed,
Yeah,
and I just get really feisty, if I'm honest, Jonathan. I just think sort of like, just waking up in the morning is a privilege denied to many, 30 years working in general practice, hospitals, private healthcare, if you have woken up this morning, celebrate that. Be grateful for that. And I know people are going to be doing it thinking like, oh God, it's Monday, or, it's another week till payday, or, last week he said that and I'm still angry. Just let it go.
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's not going to matter. Are you going to remember it in 5 years' time? Sadly, some people will, but generally, just let it go. It's, I can't, unless I want to go and do a career in nursing, please just heed my words that, live your life, your version of it each and every day.
Because there was a guest I had on a few months ago, Dan Midman, and in his book, he was talking about his father, and his father, the day before his father, the day his father died, um, he was, if I can remember all this right, he was wee bit different. He made sure he said goodbye to his children. I thought that's a bit weird. It was just kind of his behaviour was off. And he went to the next door neighbours, and I think it's the same thing to them. He was quite friendly with them. Came in, says, "Look, they're right. It's a bit weird." He he then went on to work, and he died. And I think he was a watchman or something. But he had the dog with him, and he died at work later on that day. But from what Dan was writing in his book, he he got the sense that his father knew this is my last day, and it's almost like in a weird way got to say his goodbyes. Uh, so was it again kind of ties in that idea of a good death. That you, like it's a nice way to actually go if you have that inkling, you're able to say like suppose your well wishes to your loved ones before you depart.
Yeah, I mean, my beautiful stepdad died in the early hours of New Year's Day, so I'm not a great lover of that. New year, new me. I always think every day is a new start. Get on with it,
Yeah,
But we'd been spent Christmas down with him, and as we left, he gave me this extra long and squishy hug. Almost at that point, you think, what's going on? Long enough for you to sort of question what's going on in that moment. And he's
yeah,
like, "I love you." It's like, "Yeah, I know, I love you too," kind of thing. And then he died like a week later, and I think he did know, I think, well, I know that a lot of us go through this life with this physical body and we think that's it, we come in, we die, that's it. But I believe there's a whole soul within us, we're more than our physical body. And there's a knowing my dad absolutely knew.
yeah,
And I think that's the sad thing that I didn't realise then, but as you go through things in life, you become more aware of yourself and things around you. And so I went into haematology oncology, like I said, because I didn't have a chance to say goodbye to my dad and would I have done more and all this kind of thing. But I wouldn't actually, it's a reality, because
yeah,
in that moment on that Christmas when he held me and he said he loved me and he was doing all the nostalgic things, that probably would have been our last conversation, whether he knew it or not. Whether another 10 years have passed, it would always be an extra big hug. I love you. These
yeah,
are the memories we've made together,
yeah.
So
No,
I probably do know. I think the timing of death is something the world should speak more about because, when I said that people would see families 5 years later and they'll still be frozen in their grief. And it's because they're just beating themselves up again. We are our own worst critics. And it'd be like, oh, I didn't get there in time, or I got there, my brother didn't. But there's a part in Good Grief, the book, because of this really, that if you weren't there when you died, you weren't meant to be there when they died. It's that simple. I would have loved to be by my grandside. I was about 5 miles away. But, you've got so many beautiful memories and conversations. You don't need to witness that last breath. That's not
yeah,
what they want for you. Equally, I've called in families from Germany, America, everywhere, and that human spirit's held on. But, there's no such thing as coincidence. So, anyone listening, if you weren't there when someone died, you weren't meant to be. That's not what they wanted for you or for them.
yeah,
And I believe, this is why Good Grief is really spiritual and not all clinical. I truly believe that even if you're not there by their side when they die, they're never alone. You know, I've nursed people that are non-verbal for a week, and they start communicating with loved ones that had already transitioned many years before.
Okay, yeah.
You know, so, you know, if you are listening today, the timing of death, I think we do know, like we're saying about, you know, the dads who kind of knew and told the children. And I just think you're not meant to be there, so let it go.
Yeah, no, definitely. 'Cause I think you do get people that kind of, you see that they beat themselves up with things, and I think it become, as you say, we are our own self-worst critics. Like, I think the way we speak to ourselves, we wouldn't tolerate someone outside speaking to us like that. Like,
Yeah.
I know myself, I can be very, like, I've often said to people when I was coaching people, I go, if the inner coach that coaches me coached you, you wouldn't be coming back. You just go, I'm not, you're not speaking to me like that. It's just, it's yeah, we're going to be very, 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 very harsh. Um, Obviously, we're talking about, obviously, it's quite a difficult subject for a lot of people. And I've seen this in the book, and I thought it was quite interesting. And maybe for a lot of people to listen, this might be very difficult. But uh, what is the clinical observations of the dying process? If you could summarize that part of that book, I just find it quite interesting. And I think, again, it's something that we don't talk about, and it's something that we don't. I think a lot of people aren't fully aware. And I know it covers, in the part of the book, covers like death, battle, etc. If you're able to summarize that for us.
Yeah, so I left nursing because I believe there's a clinical death as well as a spiritual death that's going on. But clinically, it's quite literally a slowing down process. The body, you know, starts to rest down on earth. And so if you were sitting by that bedside, if they have still got monitors on, I mean, I worked a lot with end of life where they get rid of that and they just allow the natural process. But it's the slowing down. So, you know, your loved one might be weeing and pooing less because the body is slowing down. The heart rate might slow, the blood pressure might lower, even their eyes will react slower to light. Even the hearing isn't that strong, although interesting, I was always told that the hearing's the last sense to go. So if, you know, you didn't get there when they took their last breath, I was told the hearing stays for many hours after, so still say those words when you arrive. But clinically, it is slowing down, like the organs are slowing down, the body process is slowing down, you know, the blood flow, it all just starts to slow as if it is going into that final stage of rest. You know, and it can be quite hard to observe that. So like something's increased, so it's like, you know, maybe if they're drinking less, the secretions might dry, but then the swallow reflex will slow as well. So you'll think they're choking but it's just everything is slowing down. So that's when, you know, we need to sort of help with the dignity process, and then they might have an injection to help get rid of the secretions and things like that. But to me, it is a slowing down. I think obviously I've changed very much in my life. I can get why people find it so upsetting. Again, it's that anticipatory grief where it's not what that person would normally do. But I think it also allows you time when you can see that slowing, you know, and if they're still verbalizing, please have those conversations with them, but allow time for them to respond, because, you know, the cognitive process is slow as well. So they might speak at a slower pace. But yeah, everything just slows down really. But in that, there is time and opportunities to be had.
Because I know in the book you mentioned like you had a colleague, and I suppose it's like a police officer being able to identify maybe someone who's guilty or hiding something. They can tell by the body language. You mentioned you had a colleague who was literally on holiday with a book in one hand and a cocktail in the other, and kind of not able to switch that nurse's brain off and going, I think that person might be gone in 4 months' time. So it's kind of, so I suppose if you're surrounded by that, you kind of start to subtly see the signs. Is that be right?
Yeah. So my friend, bless her, she was on holiday allegedly, but not my type of holiday. And it is just that sort of real, you know, you're still in work mode. And she would just sit around the pool on holiday thinking, I don't know, maybe it was spiritual and she saw something about their energy, but she would just be like, yeah, I think they'd be gone within the year. And it is sort of like, that sort of like tissuey skin, all that is sort of, how long have you had that cough for? But she had this thing, which I think is actually, this is backed medically, I think. This is not just holiday observations. That I think if you have 4 emergency admissions in 1 year, that's another indicator trajectory for your health and things like that. But yeah, that's the nursing humour, that she was on holiday and sort of looking at people thinking, yeah, I think you'll be gone in a year.
Yeah, because I think I remember reading or hearing there was a story I heard, and there was a Aladdin, and this girl who was a woman was a paramedic. She met, I can't remember whether it was an uncle or a father, but she says you need an ambulance, and people thought she was joking. She said, no, no, he's going to have a heart attack. And like, how can you? I feel grand. How can you possibly know? And I think it was. He ended up they did get an ambulance, and his life was saved. I think he avoided quite a major heart attack. But when I was reading this, they were explaining that it was the subtle signs that because she'd seen this numerous times, her brain was able to kind of what would maybe like myself or other people I know would maybe we wouldn't see it because we're not exposed to that on a regular basis. But because she was exposed on a regular basis, her brain was able to kind of subconsciously join the dots and then send the message to her brain to go, this person's going to need help. So I suppose it's probably, as you said, like a mixture of that, just getting like subconsciously being able to read signs that the ordinary lay woman or lay man would overlook or not register.
Yeah, I think intuition is key as well. I mean, when I started my nursing degree in 2001, well, I don't think it's allowed to mention intuition. It's a bit like grief, really, if I'm honest, Jonathan. But you do have it. I mean, I was newly qualified, if not a student nurse. And there was a lady, I remember, in the side room on the acute medical ward, and the doctor had changed her antibiotics. Again, IV antibiotics, and she changed them. And I said, do you think we should call the family in? He went, absolutely not. We've just changed her medication. And I did. And they were the family that come from Germany, which I always remember, because I was just sort of like, logically, the doctor has spoken to the nurse, so you meant to sort of do what they say. Apparently, that wasn't my path, but apparently you meant to. And I just thought, no, and I called the family in. And that's not the first time. I've had quite a few moments where I've called family in.
Yeah.
So maybe it is the subtle signs, maybe it's intuition, maybe it's something yet to be discovered. Who knows?
Yeah. That takes us into the next bit. But just before we do, by this in my head, I think mindset plays a big. Talked about mindset before. I know one woman, and a few years ago, or more than a few years ago, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I remember her telling me this. She got her diagnosis, and she's kind of like on this kind of. She said it's like a conveyor belt. We're very sorry you got breast cancer. They pretty much wrote this woman off that she was going to die. She was taken into a specialist room where they kind of pretty much say you're gonna be dead. Here's the things you need to start thinking about. Kind of preparing her and her husband for her life to come to an end. And she said she was sitting there and she said it was almost like it was like she's been kind of transported along to her death. The hospital staff were saying here's numbers you need to contact. You need to start planning your funeral. And it's just literally, she said she just got up and went, fuck that, like F that, sorry for cursing, and stormed out. And she literally walked out of the hospital and she refused to go back. And she was getting phone calls. They were telling her husband that he's in denial. You need to bring her in. Long story short, she's alive and kicking. Is very much alive. So it kind of shows you, kind of straight off topic here. Your mindset can have a big impact on death or not. Because I've heard of people maybe getting a cancer diagnosis and they've been told you got 5 months to live, and they went mentally in a downward spiral, and pretty much to the very day the doctors told them they're going to die, they die. There's a kind of a, have you seen that yourself? Kind of where almost like the person's mind, I don't want to say got them out of it because that's not, but if that makes sense, no way.
Yeah. And I observed it before I went into nursing. I mean, I worked in general practice as a pharmaceutical practitioner, before, probably about 10 years before I did nursing. And I always remember a guy called Mick, and he had Crohn's, if I remember correctly. And he was the most humorous guy, Jonathan. He was gorgeous. And his wife, he doted on her and stuff like that. And he was healthy, because it was controlled and things like that. And then he came in and he just announced, he goes, I've just had enough. I'm just tired of always being ill and trying to fight to be healthy, And he says, I'm giving up. And he was like, oh, no, God. He was just a gorgeous, gorgeous guy. But he died within months, And I saw it then. But then I've seen it a lot in cancer as well, where people, when you have that mindset, it makes the journey easier. This isn't to say it's for everyone, because I've seen really strong human spirits really want to get better. And sadly, that wasn't what happened for them. But mindset does help you. And I think, like, even in my own thing, like, I'm really open about my husband. I've had huge infertility issues. And so even on my own journey, like when I wanted to give up and I can't have another miscarriage and all this kind of thing, I had to go all on in, because at the end of the day, I'm a bit of a sucker for having know that at least I tried.
Yeah.
And I have seen that a lot in healthcare. Like, well, at least if I go all in and I, try alternative therapies, holistic therapies, chemotherapy, whatever you want to try, again, I trust that intuition, what you think you need. But the human spirit is amazing. Like I had like the most amazing feisty 90-year-old women sometimes, and she'd say to the doctor, don't you say that's because I'm 90, and she'd be going around doing the tea round on the ward. My own grandmother was very much like that. So the human spirit and mindset is powerful. But just in case anyone's thinking, like, sometimes that's not the end and people still died of cancer. But I think mindset's key, not even in like loss of health. I think day to day, isn't it? Like when you wake up in the morning, as I say, I wake up with gratitude because I'm not dead. That's my gratitude, like I've got my husband beside me, the kids are healthy, we've got a house, I've got a job to go to. But I had this friend, and she used to wake up, and I won't swear on your show, but she used to wake up and say, what poo's going to be thrown at my feet today? And that's what she was waking up with, And I truly believe that the universe is listening, that if you wake up going, I'm alive, today's going to count, versus what poo's going to be thrown at my feet, guess who's going to have the better day?
Yeah.
So I think, mindset always, always say, like, whether you choose positive or negative is going to take the same amount of time and energy. So always go for positive.
Yeah, no, 100%. Because I think I know people who wallow in illness and they think they're getting everything that's coming, and just miserable. There's miserable, and in a way, it kind of shows you that I think in life you can make your life a living hell or a happy life. It really does boil down to you, and how you. Yes, you can't control the things that happen externally, but you're in the driver's seat of you. So whatever comes from you is in your control. And I think it's a good lesson. And kind of going back to that lady, I always admire people who kind of almost like look death in the face and give it a punch in the nose and get a few more years out of it on the clock. I think it's amazing. Going into the next topics, I've covered this before in various interviews, and saying I'm actually very interested in myself. There's and I know in the book the book is done very well, and I like the way the book, depending on the person reading it and their own views and beliefs, it's user friendly to everybody. Mean if you don't want to go down the spiritual aspect, you can avoid that and you can stick to the clinical and the psychological aspects. If you're wanting to explore the spiritual bit, the book can also guide you. So you wrote the book really well, where it's almost like a tour you're going through. You can go this route takes you to this, and vice versa. So the spiritual aspect of death, we're seeing obviously in the wider side, religion is very much in decline, kind of through its own actions and people feeling kind of a disconnect. What's your take on that with regards to death? Because people are having more and more, maybe just a quiet service, a couple of family members maybe speaking about the individual, and then go to the graveside, see the coffin be lowered in or the body being taken away for cremation. Um, do do you think we've lost something because do you think we've lost our spiritual connection at all with regards to death? Do you think we've kind of cut ourselves off because of just the changes within society, a lot of the scandals with again I'm not bashing anyone who's religious, not bashing, but I know from my own experience within religion, so it can be very unhealthy. So it drives people away, and then you don't want to look at that because you associate the bad with that.
Yeah.
I suppose I kind of jumbled this question up. Do you think we've lost our spiritual connection with death? What's your kind of take on that? If that makes
Well,
sense.
yeah, no, I'm kind of optimistic, and I think we're actually becoming more spiritual. But that might be wishful thinking. But I honestly think we are. You know, that when we can't find the answers in our job or in someone else or in a religion, you know, and especially the pandemic. I mean, no one saw this kind of, awakening, if you will. But I think we're more spiritual because it doesn't have to be a set faith. You know, like I have like a daily routine and it works for me. And is it spiritual? I don't know. I get up, do my gratitude, 10 minutes of yoga, choose a card for the day ahead, get out in Mother Nature and walk with the dog, do meditation every night. And I think, some say spiritual, but to me, it's more like just mental health tools that I can access. So I'd like to think that we're becoming more spiritual and, with the sort of daily walks and the yoga and movement and music and, Mother Nature and anything else, whether it's spiritual or just coping strategies, I'd like to think that that's the way forward for the world, because I don't think the old way was working. I
Yeah,
grew up and I was christened, Christian family. My gran was Christian, but she's kind of a bit of a soul seeker, so she loved like a dollop of Catholicism and everything else. But then we spoke openly about death and ghosts and everything, So I mean, one of the books that I love, I'm looking down there because my bookcase is, there's the 5 stages of the soul. And, we all go through life stages. If we live long enough, we go through life stages. And around between 25 and 35, we tend to have this stage called the search. And that is when you've had a broken relationship, you're not happy in your career, you've had children, and you think, who was I before I had the children? Is this as good as life gets? And I think that everyone gets to that point in their life, not everyone, because obviously we don't all live for as long as we'd like, but most of us live to an age around 35 where we start to question, is this as good as it gets? What's my purpose? How to get more meaning in my life? And I think then it's when we get sort of spiritual curious. And so some might go, and join a faith or religion. Others might, join a knitting circle or a book club. And to me, that is kind of spiritual because it comes down to that life lesson about, connection. We're part of the same.
yeah. Because again, I'm not bored with my own journey through doing this show and stuff like that. And that's maybe something I'll touch on later date. But recently, and through some of the guests I've had on, and even some good documentaries on Netflix, there's more and more experiences, evidence that there's actually something happening when you die. And if anyone watches, it's going to be kind of like, what? Please bear with me. But there seems to be more and more evidence that when someone's pronounced dead, either at a hospital or they've been involved in a horrific car accident. I think I heard one woman who was trapped under waterfall, like a waterfall, and drowned, and they were aware of leaving their body, and they were aware of what was going on around them. What I mean by that is they were able to witness the attempts of paramedics, family, whatever, trying to rescue them, resuscitate them, whatever. And uh, there was a the guy, forget his name. He was a writer. He's on the Joe Rogan show. He's an atheist, and he had an aneurysm, and basically he was dying. And he says when he was dying, he said to the paramedics, "You need to hurry. You're going to lose me." And he then went to. I've heard quite similar descriptions. He said he went to like a place of darkness. I don't mean that as a negative. Um, he then met his father, who was a physicist and also an atheist, and you could see the experience of that him dying had a really profound effect on him that made him think, what was that? I actually seen my father, and I've heard other people kind of similar experiences. Um, what's what's your take on that? Probably maybe not did a good job of explaining that, but what's your take on 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 that on after death, and especially the near death experiences that more and more people are reporting to have again, as you mentioned, as I think it's because of the advancement in medical science that we're more and more able to bring people back from the edge.
Yeah, no, I write about this in the book, and it's kind of, I think it's one of those bits that you refer to where people, if it's not for you, just skip and it tells you which chapter to go to. But it's in the in-between states. And I speak about out-of-body experience, near-death experience, and shared death experience in there, as well as like when people in comas and consciousness and things like that. And so I totally believe in it. And it started as a very naive student nurse right up to my past life regression, where I've taken people back to death points and other lives. And, you know, I worked in ICU, intensive care unit, and there was a lady that she was speaking about it, but I just, you know, now I'd have a great conversation with her, but, you know, take back 20 years of my life and I'd be a bit quiet. Can't imagine it, can you? But she was, you know, and there are so many accounts now, Jonathan, like hundreds, probably thousands of people who, you know, have, you know, like in theatre and things like that, or when they're, you know, critically ill, like the aneurysm gentleman, where like they go and like do a quick life review, like, are you going back into that body or are you done? And it's like, as I understand it, the out of body experience is like when you have like trauma, like say if you're raped, like you have an out of body, you can disassociate, your soul can disassociate from your body. So out of body, you're still very much on the earthly plane, but there's a kind of built-in protection. You go out of your body during the experience. Near-death experience is when, as it says, you're near death. So it's like a critical illness, accidents and things like that. And, you know, the evidence behind that, I had the beautiful David Ditchfield on my podcast, Positive Changes, a self-kick podcast. And he got pulled under a train. And his story is a bit different for me because he didn't have his near-death experience then. It's when he was being healed in the hospital that he actually had it. He's now a prolific, like, classical artist and artist and musician. His background is like manual labor, you know, and you just can't logically do it, you know. And as you said about when people die, people know, you know, like they have a sense, you know, this person needs help. You know, in shared death experience, for St. Dr. Raymond Moody, I believe, wrote about decades ago. Again, like if you're not with your loved ones on a soul connection, you are with your loved ones when they die.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I love the fact is it Dr. Eben Alexander, all these doctors and physicians, and you know, Michael Newtons and Dr. Brian Weiss, all of these, you know, highly respected physicians have all had, like, you know, past life regression, you know, near-death experiences, and they can evidence it. And I think the world, you know, we are changing for a positive, I'd like to think, because you think you die, that's it. When actually we're seeing that consciousness goes on after the physical body dies, that you can visit other realms and come back and tell us what it's like. You know, you can meet loved ones that have already died and come back if that's what you choose. So, you know, people, I think it's woo-woo. That's why, like in the book, as it says, like, if this is not for you, then please go to the next chapter. But I'd encourage people to read it, you know, because there must be millions of cases if you look at the out-of-body, the near-death and the shared death. You know, it's just people haven't always spoken about it. I mean, we don't talk about life, let alone death, do they?
No. Because I'll be honest, a few years ago, I've been quite, not skeptical, but I've maybe kind of written off as something else. But there's so much that if you really believe in the kind of the scientific method, there's enough coming through that you have to kind of you can't just we're unlimited what I can see and feel and smell right now. And it's arrogant for me to kind of turn around and say, oh, that's not true, that's not real. There's something for sure definitely happening. And I think you mentioned some of the doctors there. I know a few doctors did do experiments where they put objects high up in the hospital
Yeah.
So if people died or their life kind of ebbed away during surgery or whatever, and they came back to him and says, "Oh, I died or I was out of my body," um, he would go, "What did you see above us on the cupboard on the very top?" And they would go, "Oh, you had a an odd shoe, red shoe, or you had a book or whatever." And there's also people being able to kind of there was one interview I seen of a woman who passed away, and she remembers appearing in a car and it was raining, and her sister was in the front of the car, and her sister was on the phone, and she wondered why is she dressed in odd clothes. And after she came back, she recovered. She was went into a coma, and then she recovered from that. She said to her sister, "What was the?" She goes, "Yeah, I got a phone call. You were ill. You were rushed to the hospital." She just grabbed whatever clothes she had to get in the car and go. And it was raining that particular day. There's things like that were impossible for people to kind of know in detail if you're stuck in a hospital receiving life-saving treatment. So I think it's a fascinating subject. I think if anyone is watching this, maybe a bit skeptical on that, and that's fine. Do look more into it, like. But hopefully, like spiritualize. What? Sorry.
There's just so many books out there. If you want to read a book, break out from reading a novel and just try them. I find comfort and reassurance, probably why I wrote my book from the clinical background. Just, these are like physicians, psychiatrists, there's Dr. Penny Sartori, she writes a lot about near-death experience, So even if you dismiss it at the end of it, it's still, new positive change that you're trying, aren't you?
Yeah, I think also I think people debate over is it true, is it not true? But I think that the main thing, and I don't know if you'll agree, I think it really makes you rethink your own life. Because if it's true, then you don't know how much time you have left, and you really need to get going and make it as best as you can, and make it pleasurable for other people. Not be, I know we all have bad days and good days, but try and when you have a bad day, not to make other people's lives miserable. Because I think that's the important stuff, as we've already discussed. What would you agree? Would you or?
Yeah, I know it's hard. As I'm really blessed with my career background, that I know life is precious. I know what matters in life. And I, speak really openly with my family, that I don't have any desire to die tomorrow, but I wouldn't go fighting. Do you know what I mean? Like, I got over my infertility journey, met my husband later in life, love him to bits, even the dog, but, I always wanted to write a book, and I've done that, and I just think I've got out the things I wanted to do, is there anything else now is a bonus, and I love that. Yeah. And it is like my husband, we've been married, we're together like 16 years, married for, I don't know how many, that's really bad, but we have been married. I'm going to have to get 12 years. And we still laugh every day. We still have date nights at least once a week, so remember who we are before the kids. And that's the thing, is it just do things, remember who you are on your own would be one of my key takeaways from today. Because I think that's the thing, people used to say, oh, my other half died. And it's like, you were whole before you met them, I think we just lose our identity in life from like a job role. Like, I used to identify as a nurse. When I left nursing, I was like, who am I? And then I had my children, but they went to school, so I wasn't really a stay-at-home mum. And I think, if you spend time with yourself each and every day, kind of date yourself, because it's the longest relationship you'll have in your life, then it just brings you comfort. And I do, maybe you don't want to believe in like near-death experiences, but find something to believe in life, so you get out of bed every morning. Just believe in yourself would be a start.
Yeah, no, definitely. We touched on this kind of already. I know it's in the book as well. What being advice life was interesting. What is life between life? I know you touched on it in the book.
Yeah, so this has really helped me. This is probably why I'm a little bit now about this life, but I don't want to die tomorrow, but if I did, it's okay. So just to explain to people in case they're thinking, what? So when I left nursing, I did a career break, did my clinical hypnotherapy, past life regression, went back to nursing, and then realised I prefer past life regression. So your life between life is the life between your immediate past life and your current incarnation. So I'm Shelley in this life, but I was Daniel, American boy, in my immediate past life. So my life between life is where I realized, I asked, why did I die so young? I was having a lovely old time in America. And what did I sign up for in this life? And people, again, please dismiss it if this is not for you. But what I learned in my life between life, and what you can learn, is why am I coming here? What's the meaning? What's the purpose for this? And so whilst I would never have wished, you know, on an ego earthly level, my soul lesson for this journey is love and loss. And so I've had like 7 miscarriages that I know of, many multiple. My beautiful stepdad died, 2 of my aunties, my friend took his own life. You know, I have had so much loss in my life. And the ego me would have been like, oh God, you know, I'm going to be struck by grief. Everyone I love always dies. But that's what I signed up to. I got to choose my parents. And all joking aside, mum and dad, if you're listening, I didn't have a great choice of who to choose from. I had like a black poor family, a disabled body, or this one. And you get to choose your body, your family, where you'll visit, what your life lessons are. And it's just really helped me. As I said, if I'd have, you know, not known that I'd signed up for all this loss, I probably wouldn't be that easy around grief. You know, I would never have thought, yeah, I'd really like to have 4 children, at least 7 losses. You know, you just wouldn't make any sense of it. But having been to life between life, like, what do I need to learn now? What have I not learned in past lives? And in my life between life, I asked why I got taken so suddenly from my immediate past life as Daniel. And I was having a lovely old time, smoking away and drinking, you know, with all my mates and that. But I was meant to be really intelligent and be here for the, you know, the highest good of others in the world. And I just got busy with beer and friends and girls, I think. And when they took me into my life between life, there was like a chart of what I should have been achieving and where I actually plotted, which was really poor, which is why they pulled me back very early. I was 27, I believe. And so they showed me, like, on this like graph, that there was loads of marbles. They looked like that I should have been collecting, but my graph went down. So now in my office, there's a little chest and it's full of marbles. So every day when I'm in my office, I look at the marbles and think, don't get lazy, keep achieving. Yeah. So yeah, it's your life before this immediate past life and the lessons you signed up for.
I find that, and I've heard this quite a few times, and again, it's from people who've had near-death experiences where they've kind of, it's almost like half time. Sorry to use a kind of a sport analogy, but it's like half time, and they've been kind of shown like a review of their life. It's kind of like they're saying what they've done, and it's not judgmental. It's pretty much kind of like almost like a coach kind of going, I was hoping you'd be playing a bit better, but kind of deviated this way. You go back. This is so when they go back, it's almost like they've got filled with, again, using a sport analogy, the coach kind of geared them up, psyched them up, and they're ready to play better. Just again, something I find the whole topic of this I find really fascinating and interesting. If someone lived a life that they didn't achieve what they were kind of set out to, there's a guy called Dave. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping over this. There's a guy called David Goggins. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a former US Navy SEAL, and he wrote a very fantastic book called "You Can't Hurt Me." And one of his driving people said, "Why do you?" He goes to extremes, and people go, "Why are you doing this?" He says, "Because when he dies, he wants." He says, "If you're in a queue, and there's God or whatever saying, look, this is what we expected of you. You fell short." He says he wants them to go, "You've achieved far more than what we thought, what we expected. We couldn't keep up." So there's that. It's a quite an interesting statement he makes. Going back to obviously like reincarnation, if you fell short in your life and you subsequently passed away through misadventure, is that something then it has to be fulfilled in the next time round, or if that makes sense, that question?
Yeah, no, I agree though, that, I mean, I obviously, with a woman that's lost many children, I struggle like why some people barely touch the earth and they're taken away, sort of thing. But it's, you know, from what I've seen from my past life regression, that we sort of come down here for the lessons. When we've learned those lessons, we're not matching the lessons which we agreed to, then we get taken back. And I saw it in, like, when people die by suicide, things like that, because life gets too overwhelming. And I know, like, I had a past life where I took my own life, and I was with the same partners we were in this life. And it's very interesting. So when you take your life by suicide, for example, in this life, you'll come back and have to go through the same lessons again, but you'll be stronger. You would have evolved more as a soul.
Okay.
So, like, I took my own life. It sounds very cliche, but I was Native American. I know it's very cliche, but I was Native American with my ex in this life, and he died in battle defending the village in a past life. And I was bereft and didn't want to go on. And so I took my own life. Was with him again in this life, here in good old England, not quite so beautiful and spiritual. And he left me, but this time with an affair rather than death by spear. And bereft again, but I was stronger and I've carried on, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's what I believe is, you know, what we're exposed to in some life, if it's too much, then we just come back until we have learned that lesson. I think ultimately it's not really about us. I believe that we'll go back to source, a place of love, but we come down, have the earthly lessons, and that knowledge gets, you know, uploaded.
Yeah.
You know, effectively we're all learning together. But I truly believe, and whilst it breaks my heart, because obviously I've lost many children. My stepdad died quite young. Everyone dies younger than they're sure, don't they? They're like, there's only 64. But, you know, to me, my family have died young, but they would have done what they come here to do. And if not, I'll see them again in the next life.
Yeah. Because there was, again, there was a really good documentary on Netflix. Again, I still remember the name. And there was a really fascinating, I think it's a book on this. There was a really fascinating story of a young boy. And he was having horrendous nightmares. And the parents were quite concerned, and they consulted doctors and child psychologists, and they were trying to figure out what was wrong with him. And the mum, one of these nights, he was having this nightmare. The mum asked him what's going on, and he said he was dreaming of being stuck in a burning plane, and he's on fire. And this went on for a while. The father was very skeptical, and the father thought it was psychological issues that was affecting his son. But the father actually cut this story short. The father actually started, the boy started giving more details. He said, he kept saying a name. I think it was Charlie. He says, Charlie's on fire. And I'm like, who's Charlie? He said, that's me. And he was saying, like, okay. And then he started mentioning the name of a friend. And again, this friend wasn't the physical friend that they were aware of. And long story short, the father did start doing research, and the boy was given more and more details. And it turns out that the wee boy, I think he went to a regressionist. He was hypnotized, and he started giving details of the name of a ship, and the ship sounded like Japanese. The father did a bit digging. It turned out to be an American aircraft carrier that was involved in the Battle of Iwo Jima, and they found out as the wee boy got older and the dreams become more vivid, and he was able to retain. They found out that the wee boy was a reincarnated airman from World War II, who during the Battle of Iwo Jima took off from this aircraft carrier with a Japanese sound name. He was shot down, and the plane was on fire, and it crashed, and he was killed on impact. They took him to Iwo Jima. He's seen the showed him a ship and all. Took him to Iwo Jima, and it shows him on the boat. He's crying. He's physically shaking. Once he gets on the island, it almost like a switch gets flicked and it's turned off, and there was no more dreams or terrors after that. It's almost like he kind of came full circle. Kind of he had to go back to kind of resolve this traumatic experience. It was again really fascinating. And I say there's Netflix. There's a documentary on Netflix talks about death, and this is one of the things that they highlight. So it's a truly fascinating subject. So it is.
Yeah, it reminds me of Dr. Ian Stevenson. He did another doctor bringing the clinical and the spiritual together. So Dr. Ian Stevenson, I believe his name is, did decades of research into these children that were just saying, like, you're not my mum, and in another life when I had another mum, a different dad, and things like that. And, you know, the evidence he got, and what I've found interesting, because I had to study a lot of this when I was doing my past life regression, what I studied, like so many cases in places like India, like, and you thought, well, why is that? But it is, again, what we're saying, we're kind of lacking in society today. That in India, they're really open and talk to their children, their families, and they're raised to believe in reincarnation and at death this happens. So children are naturally more open to those conversations.
Yeah.
You know, and I love that. And that's why I would like the world to speak about life, death, life thereafter. But yeah, Dr. Ian Stevenson, he's got people like that, and they would have taken, you know, they try and trick them out with these photos. This your dad, that your dad, that your dad, and they're like, no. And they can go back, you know, find the houses in these vast towns, you know, all different kind of things like incense, as you say, in war, you know. I think one was like he'd been murdered or something, and he went back and he could like find the, you know, loads of things. But I'm sure it was Dr. Ian Stevenson who looked into these children being able to
it was truly it's truly fascinating. And again, so some of the accounts I've seen, the like I've seen one boy, or he went with his mother, and he pointed out at an early age an actor in a film, and he said that's me, and they're like, what? And this started again. The parents were very skeptical. I think they were devout Christians, so this was kind of like, it freaked them out. But long story short, they went to Hollywood to find this guy's family, and his daughter was obviously elderly at this stage. It was quite the early age of cinema. But he knew things like family holidays that weren't public, because he was able to describe locations they went to that wasn't really talked about. It was like small details that if you were that person, you would know, but it wouldn't necessarily be picked up by the media or wrote about in books. So it's again very fascinating. I think the daughter and the other family member were a bit freaked out. I think they were just more curious, and brought the boy into their home to speak to him. But they did kind of comment he knew things only our father would know, but I think they were a bit startled by it. Kind of, they weren't too sure what was going on. So it's truly fascinating. Sorry for rambling. Can you tell us more? You also have a podcast. It's called the Self Kick Podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, Positive Change is a Self Kick podcast.
Positive Change, sorry.
Yeah, so my first book was called Positive Change is a Self Kick book, and I don't believe there's anything that's coincidence in life. But one day during after school, our teenage son, I said something like, he loved my first book. And I said, but then he lost his love of reading. He's autistic, so he does go through pockets of love. Right? And he goes, I haven't finished your book. He goes, but if you made it into a podcast, I'd listen. I went, all right then. It's as simple as that. So it made me realise that not everyone will read a book, but I was very passionate about mental health. And I wrote it, Positive Change Self-Kick book, after a horrific last pregnancy. As I said, I've had many miscarriages. So our Daisy, she's 7. She was one of triplets. But it's just her. So obviously that was my hit rock bottom kind of thing. And that's when I tried everything, like, you know, Chinese tea ceremony, laughter yoga, Mother Nature, believing in miracles, Reiki, tried it all. And that's why I wrote Positive Change Self-Kick book. So if anyone's got, you know, feeling suicidal, that semicolon point, do I finish my life story or carry on? I wrote that, and I was really passionate. And my son made me realise not everyone's a reader, but everyone, not everyone, I should stop saying everyone, Jonathan, shouldn't I? Lots of people are living with mental health. And I just wanted to know, just try something new. So I started the podcast. It was just me and my book, like Jack and Ori, if anyone remembers that from the 70s and 80s. Yes. Just me and my book reading out these little chapters. And I was about 3 weeks in when people said, lovely show, but, which just deletes the first part of the sentence, but I've gone through a mental health journey. I've got my own tips and tools. Could I share? And I'm ever so polite. So I said, yeah, you can come on. So I did like 6 solo shows, and then I went to do 6 of the guest shows. But now we're up to like episode 19. We're still going. There's a lot of mental health, lots of stories, but it's amazing. It's won 2 awards in the first 8 months. But it's not really me that won the award, Jonathan. It's these courageous people doing what I call in my first book, going from mess to message. And they're using all of their, like, their trauma, their addictions, their childhood, you know, to go from a state of mess and creating a message to help people, you know, at the start of that journey, which is, you know, if we can do that in life, you know, again, finding meaning while we're going through it, then the world just becomes a bit of a better place.
Random questions kind of came to my head there, just what we're talking about and about reincarnation and stuff. Do you think in a way we're obviously run our own individual journeys, but then on top of that, we're part of a whole? Do you think we're part of that is to raise our, getting quite philosophical here, do you think the goal is also that part of that is to raise humanity up, so we become more, obviously we're improving technology and we're improving our thought and how we treat each other is far different, thankfully, compared to maybe 100 years ago, and never mind 2,000 years ago. Do you think that's also part of it as well, that the purpose of this is also to kind of raise humanity up in a way to be better than what it is? 'Cause obviously, in look at humanity, there's glimpses of genius and amazing ability. There's obviously darkness and as well. Do you think that's also the case? Sorry, it's kind of a random thought kind of came in my head. As well as individual.
Yeah, no, I think, as I said, like, I believe that I come down here, learn my life lessons about love and loss, and then I feed back to a source. I can upload my heavy earthly learnings back to a place of love and light. You know, I wouldn't have chosen, well, I did choose, I can't say that. I don't logically think I would have chosen to, say, throw loads of miscarriages and take away all my favourite family members, you know, by the age of 40. That'd be lovely. I wouldn't have done that, but on a soul level, I did. And I truly believe, you know, that there's a ripple effect, and that is like in a different dimension. But also with my family, I think when we go through something, from that mess to message, when we talk about grief, when we show our strength, our vulnerability, everything, then we're changing the consciousness around me. Like my children, you know, they hopefully know how to grieve better than I did as a child, and some of the people that I was with. And I just think, I think everything is, I think we're all connected, and I think it's only the harsher members around us that don't believe that is why they're harsh, because I just think there's repercussions for every action that we have.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think I think the obvious thing is it, and what you put out is what you get back. So if you're a person that's putting out a lot of negativity, and I've seen that growing up myself, I've seen people who kind of threw their way about, were not very nice to other people, quite cruel, and sometimes how they went out was almost like, again, not taking pleasure in this, but it was almost like quite fitting for what they did. It's almost like, okay, well, you're doing this to others, you're going to experience a bit of that before you depart, kind of thing. It's almost like I've seen people kind of get their comeuppance, and it's weird. You kind of see a connection there, whereas other people who were lovely, generous, caring to other people, they had more of a nicer exit, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The thing is, I think it's only, what we see, as I understand it, my belief system is that what we see in someone is just their life lessons for this one. So like if we go back to life between lives and past life, that in the past you might have been, a murderer or been murdered, and you come into this life, so, you might have been the abuser, and then you get abused in this life. And I just think that we're like multifaceted. And so whatever we've done in that past life, we'll do the mirror of it in this life. So we learn literally both sides of every story. So you'll be a perpetrator in one life, victim, and then it swaps round. So when people say, oh, you'll get your comeuppance, I never think it's like your ex,
Yeah.
You have a car crash in 2 weeks' time. I think it's more incarnation. So like, if you harmed in one life, you'll be harmed in another. And I think that's how it is. But I think a lot of people think karma is, sort of, I don't know, not getting a parking space when you stuck your fingers up at someone. I think it's probably deeper than that. I'd like to think there's a bit more meaning to it than that.
Yeah, no. So what's next for yourself then? What's your plans going forward?
I'd love to create a world where we speak more openly about grief. Like people was like, when I was sending out like the fact that good grief, the age Z approach and modern day grief healing was coming out, I sent it to my friends who bought my first book, and she goes, "Well, thankfully I don't need this book because I haven't had grief." And I was like, "That's why I wrote it." I'm trying to get everyone to understand that, you all experience loss in life, you know, whether it's like loss of a job, finances, health, relationship, dreams, travel, you know, we're all grieving. I truly believe that. And so I'd love to drum up more awareness around that. And at the moment, I've been through a busy time of letting go of shoulds. I always thought I should do this and should do that. So I'm having a little bit of a cull in Shelley's world. So who knows what the new year will bring. But hopefully it's helping the world heal a little bit each and every day.
Oh, excellent. We're near the end, and sorry for kind of springing this question on you. It's a question I ask quite a few of my guests, because it's something I find quite interesting. I kind of added this question in, I think, it started this year. I was reading a thing by a guy called Phil Graham, and he was talking about mission statements. So my question is, what is your mission statement?
Oh, I'm just really, I know it sounds really simple and people probably got these real entrepreneur statements, but mine would just be, like I said earlier, just to get people creating small positive changes each and every day, you know. And it, you know, some people might want you to sort of divorce your husband, quit that job, but I don't think it's about that. You know, it's just trying something new every single day and becoming your own best friend.
Yeah, no, excellent. No, that's good. So how can people get in touch with yourself, purchase the book, and obviously get in link up to the podcast?
Yes, I've got a website which is shelleyfknight.com, and over there it's got all the social media links. I think it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and it's all just a Shelley F. Knight because I'm quite a simple soul, truth be known. And then you can get the book on the website, or you can head over to John Hunt Publishing. Is it Barnes and Nobles, WH Smith here in the UK, good old Amazon, or not, depends what your views on Amazon are. But yeah, it's the website and all online book retailers.
Excellent. And the podcast, I think there's a link to that on the website as well.
There is, yeah. So that's via where we host it, but it's on. You can even watch it on YouTube if you're like me, not very good at listening. So yeah, it's on like Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music. So you can ask Alexa. I won't say it because you'll start talking to me in the background. But yeah, all over the world.
No, excellent. No worries. Shelley, thank you very much for your time today. Really enjoyed having you on, and I hope, again, anyone watching this, that the information I've talked about and Shelley's talked about in great detail will hopefully help people. And I think it's definitely a conversation that needs to happen more, especially about the subject of death.
Yeah, absolutely. Just talk about life, death, yourself. Just talk.
Yeah. No, thank you, and good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.